major issue are natural disasters. I mean, we've all heard of the big hurricanes. We've all heard of the Hurricane Katrina that obviously swept through New Orleans, for instance. But obviously, if we look at the damages that a hurricane like Katrina had in the United States, I mean, absolutely devastating, absolutely terrible. But of course, the United States is a major economy, a major world power, and has the resources to reconstruct what was destroyed. If we look at the effects, for instance, of Hurricane Ivan on Grenada in the beginning of the century, the effects were somewhat different. Well, water would just not be an issue. But unfortunately, all the water that surrounds the island, of course, is salt water. And salt water intrusion is also a major issue of concern for the islands. And actually the availability of fresh water, drinking water, that can be a serious issue. And a lot of the natural resources, a lot of the resources that are used on an island often have to be imported. And that's another serious constraint. A lot of these islands are very, very remotely located. So a lot of the basic things that people need on a day-to-day basis have to be imported from very, very far away countries. And the costs of importation are huge. So you can imagine we're talking about very small economies that need to bear huge costs to import things that, for you and me, living in countries such as the United States or Italy, we just give for granted. One of the best examples of this problem is energy. We use energy for every single thing we do. And energy availability is absolutely essential. Now, when your whole country is very, very small, the ability of that country to produce energy is seriously undermined. So what you have to do is import that energy from other countries. Obviously, this has serious repercussions given that your country is very remotely located. It's very, very isolated, and transport costs, as we mentioned, are very high. So the repercussions of something like the energy crisis, which occurred recently, are huge on the economies, on small and fragile economies like those of small and developing states. So transport is a major issue. Communication is also a major, major issue because, again, of the remoteness. Just to move between these islands, to communicate among these islands, is a serious constraint. Now, the list of issues that we deal with, to be honest, is very long, and I don't want you to fall asleep. The one last thing I will mention are economies of scale. Now, you're probably all familiar with the concept of economies of scale. Now, just try to apply those concepts of economy of scale on a very small economy like the ones of small and developing states, and try and draw your own conclusions. So, now we know what small and developing states are. We know what sustainable development looks at, and we know some of the issues that affect them. Great. So, what do we do in New York to try and help the islands? Well, there's 4 main areas in which we work. The first is intergovernmental processes. So every year there are various resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly which call and invite member states to take certain action to support the efforts of small island states towards sustainable development. And there's a very complex process that goes into negotiating and approving a General Assembly resolution, and we are very much involved in supporting that process. Likewise, we're also much involved in the works of the Commission for Sustainable Development, which is a United Nations commission that meets every year and that produces policies which again should then be implemented by the member states of the United Nations to try and advance sustainable development efforts. So that's the first area, intergovernmental processes. A second area is technical assistance and capacity building. So for instance, we developed projects from New York, which are then implemented in small and developing states to address a lot of the issues that I've mentioned previously. So we develop projects, and also we assist the development of projects by other stakeholders. So for instance, if the government is developing a project, or if a local NGO is developing a project, or if another international institution is developing a project in a smaller and developing state, and they need assistance, both in financial terms and in terms of the knowledge or the capacity that we can provide, we offer that assistance. So that's capacity building, technical assistance. A third area that we're involved in is analytical work. Now, we produce a lot of reports, a lot of documentation on the status of sustainable development in small and developing states. So, for instance, we look at the trends in their economic growth, in the environmental impact of their policies, the social issues, literacy rates, health indicators, the Millennium Development Goals, how they're being achieved in small and developing states. So there's a whole host, a comprehensive host of studies that we carry out every year to assess the situation in these islands. And finally, so last point, communication and outreach. Because most people think of small and developing states as paradises to go on holiday, which they are as well, it's hard often to take their issues seriously. So we do a lot of communication and outreach work to try and explain why their issues are important and how they can be addressed. So a lot of efforts go into these communication and outreach efforts. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope you are still awake, and I definitely hope you will enjoy your time at the future School of English. That's all for New York for now. Bye bye.